Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and an Ask Me Anything show update, news, Woody's ramble, all kind of rolled into one. We'll do questions later on. So first thing is, views are on the up. I don't quite know why. Maybe it's the content. Maybe it's the time of year. I think it's possibly a combination of all those things. But after my plea on YouTube 2 or 3 weeks ago about views going down in July and August, they're on the up again. I think it's partly the Arnhem content. That's good. But also, I think, yeah, the end of the summer and people back to work and colder evenings and that kind of thing. So that's really good. So I was going to talk a little bit about what I've learned over these last few weeks on this channel, because, you know, I'm part of the learning curve as well, along with you guys. I know a bit about World War II, but I'm always learning because there's always more to learn about. And the summary of the last few weeks on World War II TV are pretty much a summary of what was happening 80 years ago. And the answer is a lot was happening. If you take the period from the breakout in Normandy, you've got the landings in the south of France, you've got the resistance in the other side of France, you've got preparations for Market Garden, the creation of the first Allied Airborne Army, you've got things progressing in Italy, you've got all the stuff happening in the Pacific and the Battle of the Philippines Sea. September sees the landings in Peleliu. We're talking about that on Thursday with Seth. And me trying to keep a grip on all these 80th anniversaries, and there's a whole lot I just didn't cover. The liberation of Le Havre, the beginning of the Great Swan. I didn't really cover that. So, that reminder of just how much was happening is really, I think, important, because when I was doing stuff 3 or 4 years ago, we were covering anniversaries in 1942 and 1943. It seemed that there were kind of almost entire periods where not very much was happening. Well, I say not very much. The Battle of Atlantic was happening. There was attrition in the desert, things like that. But you see by 1945, just the race is on to get that war over. And if I've learned one thing, it's that logistics is at the heart of it. I mean, I've said it several times these last few weeks. In this period of, well, we're in October now but the second week of September, Patton's Third Army is in Brittany and all the way across to France in Metz. That's the spread of that one army. And then you've got 12th Army, you've got all the stuff happening elsewhere, and everything becomes about, can we get enough supplies everywhere? So, as we talk about it, a lot. Without logistics, without the sinews of war, nothing else could happen. So that has been one of my takeaways, is just, again, the importance of logistics. The second one, and this connects with the fact that I've had to do a bit of housekeeping on the channel the last few days, having to block people for being abusive and insulting and taking things to heart and blah, blah, blah. And it's just nonsense. If you want to get upset about things, upset about injustice in the world right now. Get upset about women's rights. Get upset about Israel, Palestine, all these kind of things. The fact there's a war in Ukraine that is killing people on both sides. Be upset about cancer. But to be upset about an event that took place 80 years ago, and it's Market Garden. Market Garden always kicks off people. Some of them are regulars in the sense that they are people who've been hanging around the channel for a long time. They've not necessarily been subscribers. They've definitely not been patrons and YouTube channel members, Rob, but they are people who've come here. And I think a lot of it is they just want to spout off what they know and what they think they know, and bash off their opinions. And if anyone else gets in the way, they don't care. So I just want to remind people that, I say Market Garden happened 80 years ago. If you're particularly in the Monty's to blame camp, fine. If you're in it was all Brereton, Ike's fault, it was Urquhart, fine. But respect the fact that other people on the channel may have other different views of that. And this is, I'm not going to just talk about the negatives. This comes back to this second point of what I've learned over these last few weeks, is so much of our understanding of decisions made in World War II is based on the interpretations of what these leaders and commanders said. And we can't argue in some cases over the dates. We know what date Market Garden happened. We know what date Operation Dragoon commenced on, all that kind of stuff. But when you get these these statements made by commanding officers in their memoirs, in their reports, and what they were sending out at the time, so much of it is open to, well, what does he mean by that? What exactly does he mean by that? So arguing the toss 80 years later over something you can't categorically prove. We can't go back in time and absolutely be certain what Monty meant with his Operation Goodwood orders, or what was said in some of these meetings, because it's open to what these people said years later. James Gavin said this 20 years later. Urquhart said this 15 years later. For goodness sake, people, get a grip, relax, worry about the world that we're in right now, and just chill out. Healthy debate is fantastic, but accusing other, one I banned today was insulting me and saying I was just playing up to blah blah blah, sycophant to this, that. Oh, fuck off, basically. So I block them. Haven't had to do many. We've had like 100,000 views in the last 2 weeks. I've had to block about 5 or 6 users, so it's a very, very small number. But final warning: be nice, right? And if you can't be nice, fuck off. That's a bit of a paradox. I mean, telling you to be nice and then swearing at you, but you know what I mean, okay? So this whole understanding of what was happening in August, September, I mean, it's just been mind-blowing to me how much the Allies were capable of. So that's my kind of first thing I've learned. Another thing I've learned is just, well, I've always known this, but it's a reinforcing of an idea, is how much people out there who are guests on the channel know about their subjects. The depth of knowledge some of these people have, Mike Peters on last week, and Jeff McGovern, on Sunday, and George Hode talking about 10th Parachute Battalion, although someone got a bit critical of him and said he got things wrong, but I calmed him down. And, the depth of knowledge is absolutely amazing. And I really wonder how the channels where they do it all themselves can possibly keep up to date with all the understandings and interpretations of World War II. I mean, I'm getting books sent to me all the time. I'm getting guest requests all the time. And I struggle to keep on top of it all. Or what's the latest thinking on Burma? What's the latest thinking on this? So, that's why I turn to these brilliant guests, because some of them have literally spent their entire lives working on one particular aspect. So that's what I do. I harness their knowledge. Grant, it's mostly the comments afterwards. People in the sidebar are mostly regulars. There's a few weirdos amongst them. No, I'm not. I'm joking. But it's the comments afterwards. It's the people who don't watch it live. They're not usually patrons. They're not usually channel members. They don't necessarily join in the community. They're often kind of, as I said, the what's the word I'm looking for? Self-appointed experts who think they know this. And sometimes I will say to them, so can you explain to me what your background is? How have you come to these conclusions? Have you written papers on this? And they never respond. They never respond as to what their qualification. One particular guy was saying, I read the comments in a certain tone of voice. You can't always do that, which is a good bit of advice, is that, read a comment 2 or 3 times and try out different tones of voice, because sometimes it's meant as a sarcastic joke and sometimes it's meant as an insult. But this particular guy was like, it was like this patronizing tone of, I've been studying this for a lot longer than you have, I think. And what does length of time studying a subject have to do? You could have been studying something for 60 years and have it all wrong. Some of these people out there who are flat earthers, or people that believe they were, people abducted by aliens, they've been banging on about it for decades. Doesn't mean they're right. Look at Dr. Victoria Taylor and what she's contributed to Luftwaffe history in the last 10 years. She's not even 30, so age and time spent on a subject can mean experience. And I would bow to people like, I don't know, John McManus and some of these people, Robin Pryor over in Australia, Dr. Phil Blood on his train there. Sometimes it is a pathway to understanding, but it doesn't necessarily become a pathway to understanding. I think to become a better historian, to understand any of this conflict better, you have to bend with the breeze. You have to be open to new ideas, not get stuck in the mud. I'm sure if Dr. Phil was on right now, he would say that although some of his views have not changed in 30 or 40 years, some of them have changed fundamentally, because that's what history is. It's not fixed. It's not stuck. So, so that's my comment about the complexities of things and how brilliant people are. So anyway, I'll talk about what's coming up now. I haven't bothered to get a PowerPoint with all the graphics yet because I haven't got all of them made up. So starting at the weekend, I'm off for a week. I'm not off. I'm busy doing the fourth World War II TV week-long Normandy tour. Some of you in the sidebar, Scott, and others are on that tour. Hope the weather's okay. So no streaming during that period. Once we get back from that, the first week we're talking about is the Battle of Arnhem. Yeah, there we are. Phil said his views change daily. Mine sometimes change several times in a day. That may be just me. So Arnhem, one of the things about Arnhem is there's like an immediate interest in Arnhem as a city that kind of represents one of the Nazi voting strongholds, and Dr. Phil Blood will be on twice that week to talk about it. But it's also an important battle, September, October 1944, well, October particularly into November. But it also kind of touches on other subjects. And this is what I've been trying to cover these last few days and weeks, is that the boundaries of some of these battles is a little bit loose. We think of the Ardennes Forest, we think of the Ardennes, for example, later in the year, but there's kind of places between those campaigns where the front was still active, where the Allies are still pushing into Germany, for example, the Colmar Pocket, which is kind of still France becoming Germany. It's not part of the Ardennes. It's not part of the Ardennes Forest. It's a separate campaign, but it also comes in to the kind of the wider thing. So the Arnhem week will be really interesting. So Phil is coming on twice. Wants to talk about the early part of the war in Arnhem, so 1940, the occupation, things like that, the bombing raids. Arthur Harris will come up, Churchill will come up, etc., etc., etc. And then later in the week, he'll come back on and kind of talk about the aftermath and what the result was for Arnhem. This is based on his new book, which I have a nice early copy from Phil, War Comes to Arnhem. It'll be plugged during the show, but because I saw he was in the sidebar, I thought I'd plug his book really early. I haven't put the link in this, but you can find it. War Comes to Arnhem, Dr. Philip Blood. Philip W. Blood, must get his publishing name correct. Another guest that week will be Gregory Fontenot. He wrote the book No Sacrifice Too Great. He'll be looking at the First Division, US First Division, and their role there. Jason, a Canadian, is coming on, Guru, to talk about urban warfare. I'm hoping Daniel Taylor will come on to talk about the defenses of the Siegfried Line. And here's an interesting thing. We're going to have, thank you, I'm a dude, Phil. We're going to have a British story there, because just up the road from Arnhem is Geilenkirchen. And Geilenkirchen was the 84th US Infantry Division, but they were attached at this time of the year, November 44, to the British 30 Corps under Horrocks, who, of course, have been involved in Market Garden. We talked about that recently. So Christopher Jarry is coming back on to talk about Dorset Wood. So Dorset Wood is, as you probably understand it, where the 5th Battalion Dorset Regiment, the Worcesters were there as well. There were some armoured units there. So just up the road for Arnhem, which I'm assuming most of you here in the comments would kind of think of as being an American conflict, which it kind of primarily is. But just up the road, you got British. And Christopher's going to come on and talk about this particular costly battle in a wood and talk about it from the personal point of view. So that's that coming up. You're all firing away with questions. I don't know how many I'm going to get to. I haven't got to questions yet. Don't give me so many. I'll be here all night. Just kind of pace yourselves. I can see there's quite a few there to look at already. After Arnhem is a kind of a general Africa week, action in Africa, I'm calling it. I think Damien Lewis is going to come on and talk about the real Operation Postmaster that was the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare story, which was kind of on the West Africa, Spanish-held island. We've got Neil Cherry is coming on talking about the 1st Parachute Brigade in Africa. We've got a show about the Gloucestershire Yeomanry. We've got, what else we got that week? I'm still working on a couple other things. Layla Sen, a viewer who has written a fantastic book about her mother and father. She's Indian American, I suppose you'd call her, but her father and her mother met in World War II. Their story takes them through Africa. She'll be on that week. After the Action Africa is a week I'm really looking forward to. Not that I'm not looking forward to the Arnhem week, but it's the Walcheren and the Scheldt Estuary. Norma, I know, is looking forward to that. So Stephen Fisher's coming on for an as yet undecided subject. He's working on his new book on Walcheren. PM Knight is coming on to talk about the fantastic reconstruction work that happened in just, after battle, after winter, when they kind of repaired all the dikes and used bits of mulberries and terrapin amphibious vehicles, that kind of stuff. I'm hoping someone like Paul Otofsky will come on to a strategic overview. There'll be a panel discussion with David O'Keefe, Mike Bechtold, and Arthur Glaxon about the Canadian involvement. Brad from OTD Canadian Military History is going to probably do a deep dive into the Causeway battle. That'll be pretty good. After that, we've got an Eastern Front week. Then there's a miscellaneous week. In that week, we're going to have stuff about blackout murders in London. We're going to have things about Naples in 1944. Then after that, another Pacific week. I want to do a kind of conclusion to the Burma campaign week. And then if I'm still alive, it will get to kind of Christmas. And around December, there'll be Hurtgen Forest, there'll be Christmas, blah, 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 blah. So that's what we got coming up. So as always, do what you can to support us. If you're a regular viewer and you enjoy what you're doing and you're not yet a channel member or a Patreon, do think about doing that. It'll help me make this my primary earner, and I can bring you more stuff. So the links to Patreon and are in the description below. So thank you very much, Peter. It takes a lot of work. Today was one of those admin days where I just spent the whole day behind the keyboard sending emails back and forth and working things out. Another show in Welcome Week. I've hopefully got 2 Dutch historians, one of whom is a member of Dutch Parliament, or was, and their vision of it. I don't just like having British and American authors. I want the local guys in as well. So I'll kind of turn to some questions now. I'll try and go back. Niels is going to be on at some point talking about volume 1B of his epic. So he'll end up writing more words than Churchill, that guy, which would be fantastic. No Zelky yet for Shelter Week. I think I have enough with what I'm going. I've got 4. I mean, it's just that the panel discussions with David, Mike, and Arthur work so well. I don't know that I'll need Mark for that. I might have Mark come on later and do something else, Winter 44. There we are. We'll see. Let's go back and have a look at some of your questions. I'll try and do a holiday Zoom at some point. I don't know what Guy Walters' new book is about, actually, Darren. I follow him on social media, but I must have missed what his new book is on. But yeah, sure, if Guy wants to come on, we'll ask him. I definitely won't be doing anything about Nazi occultism, Roderick, because it's one of those sort of subjects on YouTube that kind of goes really off the charts into wackadoodle nonsense stuff, and you get kind of the neo-Nazi people coming out. It's well covered. Well, not to say well covered. It is covered elsewhere. I think it's a bit of a non-story, really. If you want to look into it, there's loads of stuff on YouTube. It's not an area I see myself going into. Part 2 of the Golitas video. Yeah, I've got to be in touch with Michael and get that arranged. Also, part 2 of the landing craft video with Andrew Whitmarsh. I've also got to get in touch with Caroline Moorhead and schedule her to do the Italy show that we couldn't do. Lee Miller show, I have been in touch, Andreas, or tried to get in touch with the PR people about the Lee Miller film. As yet, no joy. I don't know. I don't know what else. If I can find it, but I'll look into that. It's on my radar, but I haven't necessarily thought about it. Yeah, we will go to Homefront again. Homefront will be one of those subjects I think we'll definitely return to after the 80th anniversary is all over. So once we get to the second half of 2025, we can go back and look at Homefront and civil stories, that kind of stuff. I want to clear this 80th anniversary while we're kind of not cashing in on that as such, but taking advantage of the fact these anniversaries are pretty cool. I saw another one earlier about who was our most favorite guest. Well, it was you, Joe. It was a Dutch. I suppose, Andy McCluskey from OMD back in the early days talking about writing Enola Gay, pop star. He was pretty famous. Chris Yashima, who was an Oscar winner, a Japanese-American actor. He was on with the show about the 442nd film, Go for Broke, a few years ago. Jonathan Dimbleby, I guess, must be up there. The other guy who wrote the book about Ewan Thomas, American historian. Stuart Lee, the British comedian, famous. Spike Milligan's daughter, Jane, I suppose, pretty famous. But Peter Caddick Adams, Jones Holland, Al Murray, I guess they're all famous as well. But it's you said favorite. I've realized you said favorite, not famous. I thought you said famous. I should work my guys. Favorite guest. They're all equally fantastic. But you're brilliant. Actually, no. There's been a couple back in the early days that I was less keen on. But anyway, so that's an interesting thing. I say we sometimes about when they call it. It's one of those things. It's a vocal thing that's hard to get out of. You've got to understand that people like myself. I grew up when I read the comics. I played the models, the Airfix kits. I played soldiers in the back garden for years. It was always we. And it's very hard to get yourself out of that. Sometimes I try and say the Allies and the Axis, but I can't help. I default to we sometimes. It's just one of those things. It's very hard to get out of. But yeah, I do that. Yeah, that is Squeaky Chair. Neil is coming back, Lorelei. He hasn't been on for 3 years, Neil. He's such a busy tour guy, but he's doing a North Africa show. Yeah, so I'm going to go back for your question. So I'm going back. I should probably scroll back to the beginning and start with the early ones. But, you know, apologies, I won't be able to get to all of them. And some of them I just are too complicated, and I don't know the answers to some of them. So I'll go back and just talk amongst yourselves while I'm scrolling through. Chat amongst yourselves. Yep, weather's been good. Going back. Bar Black Sheep, the Pappy Burrington series came up. Well, I don't think we had that in the UK. I'm looking forward to speaking to Bruce on Friday about that. I in France, when I first moved over here, it was always for sale. The DVDs are always for sale, and it was always on the French TV. But I don't think I ever saw it as a kid. Rat Patrol I saw, and Garrison's Gorillas I saw, but I don't remember I ever saw it. Andre, good question. The Czechs had units. One thing I found out just 2 days ago, Andreas, is there were 14 Czechs who served with the Philippine resistance in World War II. That's a random story. Yeah, there were Czech units. There were Czech pilots attached to or part of the Royal Air Force. There was a Czech. I think it was a brigade that fought in Northwest Europe. It's one of those subjects I like to. But yeah, there's a famous Czech shoe company, Bayer or Bayern or something. Some of you know Bayer, something like that. It's still around, and they had a factory for footwear in the Philippines near Manila, I think, before the war. And when the war happened, the Japanese occupied these 14 guys. I think they were all guys. One or two of them might have been women, and they ended up fighting with the Filipino resistance. And some of them were interned and did the Bataan Death March. And I found this author who wrote a book about it, about one of the last surviving Czech who fought with the Filipino resistance, which was a completely. When I read that, I was like, I must have read that wrong. I was like, yeah, I was in bed. I was reading. I thought, no, Woody, you've read that wrong. Czech resistance unit men in the Philippines, but no, it was perfectly true. They were part of this shoe factory, and they said so. That would be something I'd love to do more about the Czech, and Slovakian and Romanian and Hungarian, those kind of. I love that kind of middle Europe part of the war. As we say, it's not quite the Eastern Front, it's not quite the Western Front, but those countries there, the Balkans. I want to do more on that. But yeah, I will try, and it's on my list to do stuff about the Czechs later on. I'll keep on scrolling. And if you can kind of put a cue at the beginning of it, so when I'm scrolling through, I can see what's questions and what's not, what's just a comment. What is your project for 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge? I'll be doing a little bit. My intention, if and for whatever I do that's Battle of the Bulge related, is probably not to try and do anything on the 101st, unless there's something really unique that's really cool. It's just, again, I feel it's been covered. There's loads of stuff on the YouTube about the 101st in Bastogne, as there is about Lanzareth Ridge and that kind of thing. If I do anything about the Ardennes, which I will, I'll try and find some of those more obscure subjects. But we have done Battle of the Bulge stuff in the past, so there's already a Battle of the Bulge or Ardennes playlist. So I'll probably do 3 or 4 things, but I haven't quite got as far as thinking about December yet. I'm still trying to plot October, November, but I will be doing some stuff. If you've got ideas for guest presenters, guest historians, then do please let me know. This is a completely non-World War II question. My favorite punk bands. So I missed the actual first round of punk. I was only 7 when Sex Pistols came out, but I do remember getting into the punk stuff kind of post-punk a few years later. I was kind of 10, 11, and then going back and finding the original stuff. Colin, my mate, he was being a bit older. He remembers the first wave. My ultimate favorite punk band remained The Damned, although some people say they morphed into kind of a goth rock and a pop. And I'm seeing The Damned in November in Paris and December in London because I love The Damned so much. I liked some of the other kind of punk folk stuff. The Men They Couldn't Hang. I liked them quite a lot. Buzzcocks, obviously. Stranglers, post-punk. I liked a lot of stuff. I didn't really like that really just kind of loud, aggressive punk. We saw Peter and the Test Tube Babies in Normandy a couple of years ago, and it was all right, but it's not. I like something a little bit more musical. Some people say, but punk isn't musical, but it is. But the damned. So there we are. Yeah, again, what else? I still try and working on the Lee Miller stuff. Yeah, it is crazy, isn't it? Why can people be rude? I don't know. You're a lovely person. I'm glad to spend a few minutes with you at We Have Ways in July. But yeah, some people are just dicks, aren't they? There you are. So going back to the questions, scrolling. What's this? Yeah, this is a bit of a boring bit when I'm going through questions. I should have an assistant or something to find questions for me. Norma's comment is well made. I'm constantly in awe of what people know. Yeah, exactly. And it brings back to this idea of the people who make these comments in the sidebar, you know, or the after a show, is that no matter how much you know, any of you know a tiny fraction of World War II. Even those who've micro-studied Market Garden or the Battle of Britain, or whatever it would be. You know, have you seen how many books there are on the Battle of Britain? Have you seen how many books there are on the Battle of Arnhem? I mean, I've got an Arnhem shelf, and I consider myself reasonably well read on Arnhem. Neil Cherry's got like a whole Arnhem bookshelf because there are books down to individual companies and battalions there, and that's just the British side of things. We start going into the German accounts and then the Dutch civilian accounts. I mean, it's massive. So yeah, kind of. Sometimes be a bit humble and accept the fact that we're all on the learning curve. How many German soldiers were stationed on Omaha Beach on D-Day? It's a really good question, Bjorn, because you have to define your parameters. So actually overlooking the crescent moon shape bit of sand on which the Americans landed, a lot fewer Germans than people would think. Somewhere in the region of 300 to 500 Germans were in the direct area behind the beach. How many were within artillery reach of the beach? Add a few more hundred. Niels will pipe in with some more comments here. Add how many more Germans are within counter-attack strike of the beach. Add a few more hundred, a few more thousand. But you know, how many were on the beach is a complicated question, but less than you think. It isn't thousands and thousands on the beach. It's absolutely definitely less than 1,000, sort of 300 to 500 in the immediate proximity. Good question though, because I can answer that one quite quickly. Speaking of guest requests, I need a Woody Little Wars TV. I don't know that I know that. Send me details, Christopher. I'll have a look into that. Yeah, we're all weird. I mean, yeah, the sidebar warriors are. We're all weird. We're all on the spectrum somewhere of weirdness, aren't we? We wouldn't be here if we weren't weird. Look at the people who are here every single show I do. No names, even when they're not in the country. Willie Robertson, I'm looking in your direction. I mean, yeah, we're all weird. It's just how weird. This is a good question. Okay, I get a lot of emails. I say a lot of emails. I get some emails or comments, people saying, how can I find my grandfather, my grandmother, my uncle's service details? So obviously it depends which country you're in. In the UK, provided you can kind of prove your next of kin, but even if you're not next of kin, you can get access. You can go to the Ministry of Defense site, look up, search for war records, and you can apply for the service records of anyone who served in World War II or World War I. What you'll get back can vary, and the same thing applies in the USA. You can apply for your service records. Now, a lot of people tell you in the USA that all the archives got destroyed in a fire. No, some of the archives got destroyed in a fire back in the 1970s. A lot of them have been replaced from other sources because the records didn't necessarily exist only in one place. There were records sent for pensions, for healthcare, this kind of stuff. So sometimes people say, oh, it's not worth bothering. They'll say they burnt in the fire. Just be persistent. Like all kind of organizations, they are overworked, underpaid. But just explain what. But you can apply for stuff. You can also apply in America for IDPFs, individual deceased personnel files, which are the details of people who were killed in World War II. You can apply for POW records in Britain. So I was in USA, in Britain, and Australia, New Zealand. There are other ways of doing it. There are all sorts of websites out there about how to search records. And then beyond the individual records, there's all sorts of war diaries you can access. So once you track down what unit your relative was in, So let's say the Essex Yeomanry in the British Army, you can go to the Public Records Office, or the National Archives, as they're now called, and you can request to see the war diaries of the Essex Yeomanry for the battalion your relative was in, and you can go through and look for references of this, that, and the other. The same thing in American. You can get morning reports, which list people into the unit, people out of the unit. You can find after action reports. There's lots of stuff. Okay, so don't just start. There's a book by Jonathan Gorn. It's a bit out of date now, maybe 20 years old, about how to research your service, your relative service details. But there's lots of resources on the internet. Just Google it, you'll find lots of stuff. Okay, but really good question. I probably have. I may have received your email. Sometimes they go into spam. I get in the region of 50 to 200 emails every couple of days. So just send it again. Sometimes they go into spam, and sometimes I just miss them. Sometimes I just don't read them. It happens on Facebook Messenger all the time. Messages just go back and I don't see them. And I get messages on Twitter. I get messages on Instagram. It's just constant keeping up to it. It's so apologies if I haven't replied to you. I'm going to keep on going through. There's lots more questions coming in. Why did Soviet and/or Polish prisoners turn soldiers defending normally not just raise their arms in the air and say, "I give up, save me, please"? It's a good question, Rob. Generally, whether you're an Allied soldier or an Axis soldier in whatever war, the actual process of surrendering is really dangerous. And so let's walk through this. Okay, the first thing is if you're talking about surrendering in advance, so like, it's the morning of D-Day, for example, and you see shitloads of ships out there, and you kind of think, well, I'm going to head down to the beach, and make a white flag out of my underpants, with a brown stripe down the middle, maybe, if you've seen all those ships. Sorry for the toilet humor there. But you've got officers who are behind you. If you're in an Ost battalion, you've probably got German officers. Sometimes they can be a bit trigger happy, and there are all sorts of cases of people from all different nations being, Soviet troops, German troops being shot for desertion. Desertion can be a capital crime. So, whatever the reason, whatever the cause, your own side can try and prevent you from surrendering. That's the first point I would make. The second point I would make is this process of actually surrendering, as I said, can be very dangerous. So think about the scenario. Okay, there you are. You're with your squad of men. You're running down a street in Italy, and you're under fire from Germans. And the German has just, he's been told, maybe he's not a German. Maybe, as you say, he's a foreigner. He's a Polish prisoner of war who's been assigned to sit behind a machine gun. But he's got officers behind him telling him, if you don't do this, we'll shoot you. So he's been doing his job, and he's been shooting his machine gun down the road. And then he decides, I've had enough of this. But with some of his rounds that he fired, he might have killed my best mate who's running on beside me, and suddenly there's that guy who has been shooting his machine gun 1 second, and then he throws his hands up. I'm not saying anything always happened in these situations, but surviving that moment when people are angry and there's the possibility of friendly fire, and there's fire coming in, there's cover fire coming in, being able to ascertain that someone in the middle of a battle with smoke billowing and gunshot firing is going to surrender, and is clearly trying to surrender. What if they're putting their hand up to throw a grenade? What if you've been wounded in one arm and you put your hand up to surrender, your good arm to surrender, but the person attacking you thinks it's a grenade and you get shot? That's a very complicated situation. Now, once you're in captivity, the Allies, Western Allies, were generally very, very good at looking after our prisoners. If you were captured by the Germans, the SS, not maybe quite as much of a chance of survival. If you're captured by the Soviets, the German, things get complicated. If you're captured by the Japanese, if you're Australian, British, But the Western Allies, if you were a prisoner and you have successfully survived the surrender process, 999 times out of 1,000, you'll be taken back to a nice, comfy prisoner of war camp, fed really well and looked after, and you'll survive the war. But that process, getting through the process of surrender, is really complicated, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It's like you see in riots today. Someone is rioting in the street, then they decide they've had enough, so they kind of put their hands up saying, yep, I'm stopped now. But how can a police, how does a policeman know whether the person is, again, are they going to put their hands up, or are they pulling for a knife or something? It's very hard in that situation to understand people's motivation. So that's some stuff there. Okay. So this is good. We've had this question before, but I will answer it again. Why were the Western Allies not aware of the hedgerow problem before the D-Day assault? Was it oversight, bad recon? The Allies were perfectly aware of the hedgerows in Normandy. The Allies had aerial photos by the thousand. They had geological studies. They had studies of the fauna and flora. They had information from people who've been living in that part of France. They had a whole picture. All of it was compiled into booklets. You can even buy these booklets, these books of the kind of intelligence information that were passing the desks of officers, where they have these wonderful line drawings of this is what Normandy hedgerows are like. This is how the lanes work. Here are aerial photos, etc., etc., etc. The Allies knew about it. What you mean is, why did the troops at the sharp end not know about the hedgerows? Two separate questions. I don't have a full answer for you. Oversight, mistake, errors, but I think one of the key ones is the maintenance of strategic surprise on the morning, whenever D-Day is going to be. And this doesn't just apply to D-Day, it applies to all of the amphibious landings, all the surprise operations in World War II. You need to hope that the enemy do not know you're coming. Okay, the Germans have all these troops all along the coasts of France and Belgium and blah 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 blah, and they know an invasion's coming. If the Allies had put every single Allied soldier, infantryman, tanker, pioneer, engineer through a course in the weeks before D-Day about, here is the terrain of Normandy, here are the methods we've devised to deal with it, here. That's 1.5 million soldiers who've been through that training. What if there were German spies in England? Now, as we now know or believe, every German spy in the UK was a double agent, actually, by this point, operating for the Allies, I think. As there's someone may correct me on that. But what if there's one that the Allies haven't found out? What if there's another spy? What if one message gets back that is just that smoking gun the Germans need, and they go, well, I can tell you, says this spy, let's call this spy Angela, I don't know why. It's actually a guy called Keith, but Angela is his code name. I'm making these names up. She finds out that all these thousands of stories have been going, GIs and Tommies have been going through a Normandy training course, and he sends that information to Germany, and the Abwehr and the German intelligence department decide, well, that's it. That's what we need. It's definitely going to be Normandy, and they move all the tank divisions down to Normandy. Well, knowledge of the hedgerows wouldn't help you if you're dead, because you haven't survived the actual assault. So that is my answer as to why, basically, let's just get to Normandy alive. And then once we get there, we can work out. Now, I do concede that there would have been methods. They could have worked out some tactics for it and kept the lessons of those tactics in the bag. You don't have to tell you, but at least train up. Let's train up 500 specialist officers, British, American, Canadian, who have looked at the hedgerow problem, had quangos and PowerPoint presentations and meetings about it, and come up with some tactics. And then once you hit Normandy, they go around all the units and say, right, here's the latest thinking about how to deal with hedgerows. You could apply the same lessons to urban warfare, but it didn't happen. Anyway, there we are. That was that question answered. I'm going to keep on strolling down. God knows how many more there are. We'll keep on going. Actually, there's not. I don't know. My screen just updated because there's loads more coming in. So that's a good thing. Any plans for tours in 2025? So far, we're just doing an October one. I envisage being too busy in the spring and April with my book and all that kind of stuff to do a tour in April. If I do, I will let you know about it. And probably the tour in October, just to shake things up a little bit, will be the same sort of tour, but primarily aimed at Americans, covering the American campaign in Normandy, with a couple of, removing a couple of the British days, adding some American days, and then we'll maybe do a British tour the next year for British and Canadian people. It just that's one of the ideas we're having. Peter O'Connell, Julius Caesar campaigned about bocage. Yes, and there's a whole thing that bocage was in part ways cultivated by the Romans when they were here. So that's interesting thing there. Um, so there we are. That's the hedgerow one there. Have I ever looked into the logistics on POW welfare? Yes. Obviously, it varies hugely from country to country and theatre to theatre. And we had I forget her name now, the historian on about the Japanese POW camps and the treatment of Allied prisoners of war. And her theory was that although there was lots of barbary and savage Japanese people beating up people and torture and stuff like that, a lot of the Japanese problems stemmed from logistics. They just couldn't get enough food and stuff there. I'm not excusing the Japanese. I'm not, but for example, that's a subject where us Brits, because of growing up with Bridge on the River Kwai and all those war films, we have this this idea that it was all of it was a deliberate atrocity. And I'm not saying it wasn't sometimes that, and in part that, but a lot of it, which harks back to my first comment today, logistics. The same with the Soviets feeding all the Germans. If you take millions of prisoners that you aren't necessarily expecting, yeah, okay, there's the whole ideology behind the Lebensraum and killing all the, well, that's not a subject, but POW care becomes a big issue for anybody if you start taking considerable numbers, and especially if you're then losing the war. So that's a really interesting subject, and it varies considerably. But the conditions, if you were a German prisoner of war in America by the end of the war, and lots of Italians and Germans were taken to the USA, you had life pretty good. In fact, a lot of Germans kind of then emigrated to the US and Canada post-war. Some of them were put into communities where there were already German farmers. You weren't even kept behind wire. You were kept in a farm. You were working. You picked turnips or dug potatoes or harvested whatever. So the same for British and Italians and Germans held in British camps. Italians held in Glasgow, for example. Obviously, the Far East very different. Obviously, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of work. I've got a whole kind of shelf on POWs, things like that. But it's a really good question. Thank you for that one there. Let me go down to some more questions. Yeah, that's an interesting comment from Rob Crane there. So Rob is pretty knowledgeable about the whole research of the beaches in advance of D-Day. So one document I've seen suggests the Germans noticed while the training landings happened mid-tide and started shifting their beach obstacles in response. If right, they were looking at UK events. That's interesting about the Germans anticipating at what tide an amphibious landing would take place, and to boil it down to basic. The Germans kind of thought we'd come at high tide because we would want to be closer to the beach. The Allies pretty much decided to come just after low tide, so the obstacles are exposed. And the reason the Germans put the obstacles is they thought we'd come at high tide, so the high tide would conceal the obstacles, and the obstacles would then rip up the undersides of the landing craft and what have you. So, but that in fact, when people say the landings came at low tide, they came an hour after low tide. So it was a rising tide. It wasn't the full low tide, but anyway. Was there really a crazy Dutch lady I shown a bridge too far? Not that I know of, but the scene in the film where the people in the mental asylum escaping in the bombing, that's true. That there were people, poor unfortunate people who were broken, who the wall had come down. They were wandering around in the woods there, and some of them were casualties of artillery and things like that. That is true. There's also an urban myth that's not true, that one of the mental patients in the wood in the film is Richard Attenborough himself, but it's not. It's just a kind of, I guess it's an elderly Dutch guy who looks a bit like Richard Attenborough. It's not Richard Attenborough as far as I know. There we are. That's a really good question too. What is it about Arnhem that makes people flip their beanies? I don't know. I wish I knew. The two subjects that we've tackled on the channel that have received the most comments were the show I did with the Australian journalist historian Paul Ham about the alternative of dropping atomic bombs on Japan. And I have to say, as much as I liked Paul, I didn't agree with a lot of what he said. A lot of what he said I found very interesting, and he challenged what he said made me challenge my own understanding. But I welcomed the discussion, and he was a really nice guy, and he'd done the groundwork and come to a different conclusion to lots of people. But that one really brought people out the woodwork. Not actually, most of them very hostile, just disagreeing vehemently with what Paul said. But Arnhem, I don't know what it is. I don't know why Arnhem and Market Garden. I think it's because, so I said I don't know, but now I've got a theory. I think it's because with what if scenarios, if you've got they should have done this theory, no one can prove you wrong. You can't prove it's right. It's a claim. I've got my my sweatshirt on today, which I wear a lot as a historian. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Christopher Hitchens said that, the late great Christopher Hitchens. So if some of these people who've got this theory about, let's say they think it was all because of the lack of the 2 lifts on one day or something, and they will look at the memos, and they will interpret all the correspondence between Monty and Brereton and all these things to back up the theory they've got. And then they'll come on and say, this is why it went wrong. They can't prove anything. It's only a claim. We can only go by what happened. We can only go by the interpretations. But I think because people have spent a lot of time putting these theories together, they don't want anybody else to challenge it, which is interesting because it suggests to me that they've never really discussed these ideas with anybody else. If you're an academic historian, as some people are who are my guests on my channel and some of you watching now, the process of becoming an academic historian teaches you about sources, and you have to go through a peer review process. Just like in science, when someone says, I believe that you can make gasoline out of old Lego bricks, you have to prove it. And in fact, you do your thesis, and then other people try and repeat the experiments you've done. And not just academic history, but if you write a book, if you publish a book, if you have a website, if you have a YouTube channel, and you say, my theory is the Battle of Arnhem all went wrong because Modal was a Pisces. I have no idea what Modal's star sign was. I'm a Pisces, but let's just say that, right? And you say that's what it goes. And Brereton, Montgomery was a Virgo, let's say. So therefore, a Virgo was never going to beat a Pisces in a ground conflict, blah, blah, blah. If you put that on YouTube, people will come back and say, mate, it's nonsense. You'll be laughed off the channel, okay? And I think some of these people have just never allowed themselves to engage in dialogue. When me and Colin are at the pub, and a lot of things we agree on and some things we don't agree on, but the conversation goes round, and someone might join us who's, on a trip in Bayer, and they'll join the conversation. We all disagree about things. We all disagree about who our favorite footballers are and who our favorite bands are and things like that. But I think that's the people who get angry with other people are the people who just aren't used to engaging in dialogue with people. They're just not used to being told, actually, I don't think you're right on that. And I think if I have to put it on something, Terry, I think that's what it is. People they're not used to just having to explain themselves. They've come to a conclusion, and they won't shift from it. So there we are. That's going to be my my answer to that one there. Was Allied logistics screwed up? Yeah, but only because that's the nature of the beast. James Holland always says this. I mean, the by 1944, the Allies are dealing with big war, and the Germans can't. So the Allies have what he calls the restrictions of wealth, and the Germans, the Axis, have the freedom of poverty. So the Germans can launch all these, quick lightning camp and group charges up towards the beaches that are all going to go wrong, all going to result in disaster, but they'll get these instant little gains of knocking out a few Allied tanks, things like that. That's all they can do. They haven't got the means to put together, well, they can't do Lüttich in August. And Lüttich, it's 7 armor divisions, but it isn't really. It's like 2 complete ones and parts of 3 or 4 others, but it's not what it was in 1940. So the Allies, to get, to plan to build 50 airfields within 3 weeks of D-Day is a lot of manpower. To get all the stuff we were getting from across the Atlantic and across the Pacific, it's really, really complicated. So, and the more you've got to sort out, the more complicated it is. And it's not like they've got a computer that can, process all the data and say, well, put all this stuff on that ship because that ship moves at 7 knots. Put this stuff on that ship because that ship leaves at sails at 12 knots. So that ship, this all has to be done with just people and bits of paper and pencils and abacuses and stuff like that. That's a very good question. I love your username, huge arsehole. German historians exist in the World War II subject. Yes, there are some very good German historians. And there are some very good German historians running World War II channels on YouTube. My experience with German historians, and I completely am sympathetic to where they're coming from, is that they are a little bit wary of the live format that World War II TV is. In that people are interpreting or examining with a microscope anything any German says about World War II, ready to leap in with you must be interested in the war because you're a Nazi yourself. That is kind of, if you're a British historian or American historian, like who can I think of? Well, Phil Blood writes a lot about the Nazis. What's his name? Douglas Nash, who writes a lot about the SS divisions. He's an American from West Point. No one's questioning why he's doing it. But if you're German and you've got a real deep interest in Tiger tanks, there's this. Well, is it because you want the Fourth Reich? Is it? So it's very, very difficult. Andreas is a fantastic ambassador for the modern German who is interested in this subject, knows that being German has some baggage, wants to learn, blah, 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 and understands there's a complication there. So German historians can be a little bit reluctant to kind of jump into the arena and have people assume they're saying. So that's why they tend to go into those that are working. It's in the pre-recorded where they can work to a script. They're doing it in their second language and they can make sure they're saying exactly what they want to say, have all their sources there. So I'd love to get more Germans on. Have we done stuff on Hobart and the funnies? Sort of. We did some stuff about engineers and funnies and stuff in past. We did the Churchill crocodiles in Brest recently. They've come up in passing, but we haven't done a dedicated show about Hobart's funnies, unless I have and I've forgotten about it. Thank you very much. That's Lance, Stephanie, Outcast Creative. I saw your post on Facebook last night, Lance, about the Chris Christopherson tribute you did on your channel. I'd already gone to bed. Otherwise, I'd love to join in and talk about Chris Christopherson, the late, great Chris Christopherson. You know that every now and then there's that celebrity death that really upsets you. Chris Christopherson kind of really upset me. I had a massive, great Chris Christopherson marathon yesterday. I got into his music first, and then kind of and his acting, I suppose. But I mean, I love the early stuff. I love the Highwaymen, all that. Anyway, that's a random side thing there. I'll keep on going, looking through questions. I don't know who the people are who get very angry. I think it's Americans angry at Brits and Brits angry at Americans, mostly. Other people have had to ban recently. I don't think there are Canadians, Aussies, and New Zealanders involved in this. I don't think Dutch, Belgian, French. It seems to be the Brits who don't like people having a go at Monty, and the Americans who don't like people having a go at Ike and Brereton. That seems to be where it stems from. So there we are. Daniel Howes, should the UK have stepped back from being as involved in the war economic as much in order to prepare for the post-war world? UK's economics are really interesting. I've got some guests lined up. I did a series of shows on economics, and I'm going to do more of them. Tansy, who's a friend of mine on Twitter, has done some really good work into the British economy, because I was always under the understanding that things like the Mulberry Harbours, put British economy back for decades after war, and having to pay back the Lend-Lease loan to the USA and all that kind of stuff. But basically, what she's saying, other people are saying, is actually the British economy recovered really damn quickly, and whilst creating the National Health Service. And by the way, my favorite politician of the 20th century was Clement Attlee and the post-war Labour Party. I'm not always a Labour fan, but that government, I think, was a win. If we did do a Hobart show, I've forgotten it, William. I've done nearly 1,600 of these, so my brain is a bit shit. But the economy thing is very interesting, and basically, I was talking to Mag about this. Is that there's also this idea? I'm going off on a typical Woody rabbit hole right now. There's this idea that um, France lost a generation in World War I, and Britain lost a generation in World War I, America lost a lot of people, and then there's a Spanish flu added to that, and Germany lost a generation. And that population-wise, these countries, were suffering for decades afterwards. Actually, the figures don't bear that out. The analogy is when you prune a rose bush, as if I do any gardening. We've got a rose bush in our garden that looks like bloody Burmese jungle. I never touch it. But if you prune a rose bush, you actually encourage growth. So the loss of a generation in World War I and World War II is that people kind of subliminally and naturally felt a pressure to kind of go out there and marry and have babies. And so, yeah, a lot of men folk had been killed, but actually the families were bigger after World War I and after World War II. Healthcare had improved, not perfect, but healthcare improved. You look at, in my own family tree, some of my family members born early 20th century, you have 6 kids, two would die in infancy. After World War I, it's maybe 1 in 8 would die in infancy. After World War II, you're getting to the point where, yes, of course, there's the odd child mortality, but it's dropping. And so actually, the idea that Britain's economy was totally broken by World War II, it was affected by World War II and set Britain back a bit. But actually, in some ways, it recovered pretty healthily. People say, oh, it's more complicated than that. And it is more complicated than that, which is why I will have experts on to cover this in the future. So there we are. He's thinking about after 1943, kind of in the build. You're thinking about in the build up to the 44. Yeah, it is pressures. I mean, the Houses of Parliament, the Commons, everyone's talking about the pressures. The Battle of the Atlantic has cost shitloads of money and lives and stuff, and it's now the realization that the US is going to become the kind of the senior partner. But you've got to be in it to the end. You've got to keep on going. So the Mulberry Harbour is a clear example of the fact that British are still spending way beyond their overdraft, if you like, in 1944. So there we are. Thank you very much. I'll have a beer later on, Gary. I will indeed, and welcome to the membership, Don Frank there. Yeah, we have raised the question, what is a historian? I invited a colleague I know in Normandy to come on, and she's uncertain about coming on because she says, I'm not a historian. She's a tour guide. But she's actually Russian, and she's been living in Normandy. I think her perspective of being someone from Russia, living and working in Western Europe, and her perspectives on the war will be really interesting. But she shares history because she's a tour guide. But is she a historian? Well, by some classifications, not. But, there you are. There are people who don't like me who say I'm not a historian, and there are people who say I am a historian. Whatever. I use the label loosely. I don't say I'm a qualified historian, but I think kind of a body of work like I've got behind me, if that doesn't make me at least some kind of historian, bottom rung, of the ladder, but it is, yeah, what is a historian? If you're sharing about the world, history, and people are listening to you, you're kind of a historian. But there you are. Keep on going, company. Yeah, Mark Loop, the logistics of the Normandy campaign is just awesome. Logistics are just awesome, full point. That's it. That's all we need to say. Logistics are awesome. Boom. Why did the Germans fight so hard until long after the end? That's probably a question for Phil Blood. We have discussed this in the past. There's a lot going on. I guess the first simple-ish explanation is that there's nothing more dangerous than the wounded animal. Look at those nature documentaries when the tiger is dying, but it's trying to save its cubs and it's still being ferocious. And that's kind of as the war gets to the German heartland and into Germany, people fight there. There's the propaganda effect. I mean, the Germans are masters, unfortunately. The Nazis are masters of telling their people that it's still going to work and the wonder weapons and blah, blah, blah. We're going to do this. And simply the last one, which is the kind of the toughest one to kind of wrestle with, really, is the ideology. Is that a lot of Germans had just bought into the whole bloody Nazi bullshit and wanted to just see it through to the end, because people don't like giving up on their ideas, giving up on their, racists who go to the gallows of racism, which doesn't exist, still being racist. They just don't want to give up their shit ideas. Flat earthers, it's not really a fair comparison, but that if you've signed up for something and you've gone into it totally jumped in, as so many Nazis did, this is the best thing, we're going to do this, we're going to, it's hard to give up that. I mean, we can now see it for the bullshit it is. We can see it for the evil, bloody stuff. And I think once you've lost friends for a cause, that seals it as well. If you're a German fighting in Normandy, you've been in North Africa or you've been Eastern Front, it's like, if you give up now, what was it all for? So I think just kind of this kind of just, they know they're beaten, but it's like you just don't want to admit to yourself you've fucked up, This is a ridiculously trite comparison, but look at people who stay in loveless marriages because they just don't want to give up on something. People who support football teams that are shit, they just don't want to give up on the dream. It's an unfair comparison, but it kind of makes some sense, is that if you've bought into something, you don't want to give it up. So I think that's part of it. How much in World War II broke, well, it didn't break it, but the USA arguably comes out a stronger economic power after World War II than it went into it. Look at what happened. Look at the GI Bill. But everybody else, on the winning side, on the losing side, World War II is financially disastrous. Although, that said, as I said with my rosebush analogy, some of these countries bounced back very quickly. Look how quickly Germany bounced back. Berlin airlift and Japanese technology. Look at all the American bases that brought all that prosperity to Japan in the post-war years leading up to Korea, when Japan are now part of the anti-communist thing. So countries recovered at different speeds. Look at the London Olympics 2012 and that part of Stratford in London. It still essentially was rebuilding after World War II, after the Blitz. That part of London had been kind of patched up with, prefab houses after the war and cheap concrete and stuff, and was waiting for a proper kind of inner city regeneration, as Germany is still getting inner city regeneration really after World War II, because they rebuilt quickly with kind of shit temporary stuff, and then decades passes. Now let's go back and beautify. So the rebuilding process financially and practically it's still going on. That's a really good question, Rob. Was Mulberry a waste of resource, given Mulberry A got trashed but unloading still worked okay? See, the data will tell you that we didn't need the Mulberries, right? Look at the supplies being brought ashore on Utah Beach, Sword Beach, Omaha Beach, blah blah blah, the other ports we got later on, and maybe that expense wasn't necessary. But my answer to that is, after the big storm in June, which was significant, 3 or 4 days of storm, and the American harbor got trashed, and it really slowed up the advance. I mean, right in the middle of the attritional phase, kind of starting in Normandy, the Allies can't get supplies ashore because of the storm. Okay, there's not much fighting going on either because of the storm and the weather. Well, there's still fighting going on, but maybe not as much. But once it kicks off again, the weather clears, the Allies have got to catch up the backlog of supplies they've been missing out for 3 or 4 days, and that affected the Allies for arguably a couple of weeks, 3 weeks afterwards. But after that period, all through the rest of June, the rest of July, into August, even into September, as far as I know, no storms. So unloading could carry on those beaches day in, day out. The Mulberries were your insurance policy. They were but what if we get even more storm with agency? You can't predict what's going to happen. The beach landings can only happen when you beach the LSTs, and then when the tide goes out and it gets sitting there like a stranded whale, then the tide comes in again, it goes back out. The Mulberries, you can unload and go straight back off. You back out, you can back out of the harbor and go and get more stuff. Okay. So the Mulberry was an insurance policy that we can carry on unloading stuff through the summer until we get Antwerp, until we get the ports in Brest, until we get the ones in the south of France. So, when you're signing up for your house insurance every year and you're looking at the policies and you're going, do I need? I'm in Ohio. Do I need shark attack insurance? Do I need? I'm joking now, but do I need alien invasion insurance. Do I need that policy? I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean. You need it when it comes, though, don't you? That day when you haven't signed up for alien invasion insurance and there isn't alien invasion, go, shit, why didn't I sign up for that? At least I'd get my, my TV replaced. I'm kind of being facetious, but that is how I see that. I'm in a good mood. Maybe that's partly why I'm being facetious. So the mulberry to me is necessary. It is a good backup plan. It's a plan B that you won't hopefully have to go to, but it's there if you need it. So I had someone who I had to ban because he was spamming all the comments about. It started off fairly innocently about he thought the market garden was an allied feint and it wasn't meant to succeed. It was like, hello, where are we going with this? And I thought, okay, run with it, Woody. Let's hear this guy out. And then it turned into Hitler escaped to Argentina, all that kind of bullshit, So in the end, I said, take your views elsewhere, but he kept spamming, so I blocked him. Hitler died in the bunker. That's it. There's no serious historian claims anything else. Yes, some Nazis got to South America. If Hitler got there, he got there without his jawbone. That's kind of the smoking gun. The skull that was found that the Russians said probably isn't his skull, blah, blah, blah. Read the book by Luke Daly Groves, the Hitler's Death, and all the FBI, all the CIA, all the stuff, all the MI6, MI5, it's all there. He absolutely died in the bunker, as did Ava Brown. And anybody who thinks they got to South America is not only wrong, they are verging into that whole why do you want Hitler to have survived? I question people. I'm not saying this is, you're just asking this as a question. I think there's a bit of, oh God, he died in the bunker. That's it. This is nothing complicated. He died in Berlin. A good question, JC. I'm going to do some Colmar Pocket stuff, hopefully, when we get towards it. I think it's because it falls in the gap, in the gaps. It falls between things we know how to put labels on. I was saying it earlier on. Colmar Pocket, it's not really the Bulge, it's not kind of the Vosges, is it the Battle for France, is it the crossing of the Rhine? It's kind of none of the above and all of the above. It's complicated. I will be covering it though at some point, so don't worry about that. So I will do more on the Battle of the Atlantic, but not yet. DKS, because it's a subject I'll get back to once I've concluded the 80th anniversary stuff. We've done some Battle Atlantic stuff, and we will go back and look at some stuff again, but it won't be in the near future. Are you interested in hi Bruce, another guest there, are you interested in doing something on World War II Pacific bases now being reopened? I'm interested in the World War II angle. I'm not really interested in where we are in modern politics. I kind of steer away from that, Bruce, because it's another massive, great subject. And yeah. Lorelei, Chris Christopherson's sister. Helen Patton, who I know, who was obviously the general's granddaughter. Her father, George Patton IV, Chris Christopherson, was his helicopter pilot for a while in Germany, I think, in the whenever that was. Yeah, so yeah, I keep on scrolling down. I probably haven't got anywhere near all your questions yet. Love to see a podcast on US, Aussie, and Kiwi cooperation in the Pacific. I've done a few things in the past. Every time I've tried to get Australian, New Zealand, American, British historians on a panel discussion at the same time, you enter the whole bloody time zones thing, because someone would have to get up at stupid o'clock to do it. But I do want to get stuff on cooperation, but with people from those things. But I've done a lot of Aussie. Well, we've done a lot about Australian and New Zealand involvement in World War II. I'm very proud of the fact we cover them, as there are some notable creators of World War II content, one of whom does stuff particularly on a public TV in the US, but it's just so American centric. It's good stuff. It's just, there are other people involved, and Australians should learn more about Aussies, and New Zealanders and Aussies should learn more about the Brits, and Brits should learn more about the Dutch. And I'm always trying to do that. So keep on going down the things. Attlee is indeed underrated, and Winston Churchill would have said he had much to be underrated about. Yeah, and they got on very well. Yeah, so just wasn't a very showy person. And Nye Bevan is probably of that government. Nye Bevan the Welsh, when Labour ministers were proper working class, you know, miners and steel workers and farmers. Nye Bevan, absolute hero. He's the guy who said, and you can quote him on this, you can check the actual quote, no country should consider itself civilized until it offers its countrymen free healthcare, something like that. Look it up. Kind of still believe in that a lot. Yeah. Are you still doing the museum guys chat? Yep. Again, I want to do more historian chats, more museum chat. It's fitting it in. The next until we get to spring next year, when things wind down in Europe, that's when I can see my schedule allowing to go back to others. Right now, it's just still hammering on through these 80th anniversaries. But yes, more museum interviews. There'll be some odd Churchill stuff coming up and things like that as well. Have I looked at speaking to Phillips O'Brien regarding war clubs? I have, and as yet I've not pursued it. I find what he says interesting, but I don't know that I've warmed to him particularly as a historian. I don't know why. I haven't reached out to him. Some people like him a lot. He's a bit Marmite. He divides. Some people think he's the best historian ever, and some think he's totally awful. I've not read his books. Yeah, he's on my radar. Just never kind of done anything about it. I'll keep scrolling down. I'm 100% a historian. Well, thank you very much. But we'll see. I'd like to think so, but some people keep. Martin Middlebrook was a farmer. Yeah, that's it. He just took up history, no qualification whatsoever. Yeah, Martin Middlebrook, fantastic book on the Somme, fantastic book on Arnhem, blah blah blah. Or maybe I'm far from the bottom rung, but how tall? How many rungs on the ladder? That's the thing. You know, maybe I'm 10 off the bottom, but maybe there's 100 rungs. That's a kind of a philosophical discussion. How many rungs on the ladder of life? Yeah. There we are. Any plans to have PCA on again? How is his health these days? Well, I don't want to kind of speak for Peter. He lost his dog Boar last week, which he wasn't in Croatia when Boar died, which was very sad. PCA is a bit of a will-o'-the-wisp, is PCA. When you meet Peter, he'll say, sorry, I probably owe you an email. Yeah, you know, you kind of send 4, get reply to 1. I understand it. He moves on an ethereal plane, does Peter Caddick Adams. As far as I know, he's on the mend, and I will have him on again. It's just pinning him down. He's busy and he moves around a lot, but yeah, we're in, he's a great mate. I love Peter Caddick Adams. He will be on again. I'm a new media pioneer. I like that. I'll put that on my tombstone. Woody, a new media pioneer. That sounds really cool. I like that. Can I have that? Can I have that? I'll take that. And Mag says thank you as well. So she has to deal with my ego. Sometimes I'm really down because people say I'm awful. Sometimes I'm up because people say I'm great. I'm very simple. Yeah. So I'll keep on going down. A very good point, Rick. One of the great things about World War II is you don't have to be a qualified academic to share a story. That is exactly one thing. You don't also have to be professionally slick at it. The fact is, not everybody can be a James Holland. Not everybody can be a John McManus and just come on and have all the facts and stories at their fingertips. As you've noticed, sometimes some of my guests you can tell it's their first time. The knowledge is incredible, but I have to kind of bring them along. And it's like Lance is a director, Outcast Corrective is a director, directing people, acting. Some people have got natural, other people you've got to tease out that talent, tease out that, confidence. But everybody's got a place. So yeah, Norma, you were fab, all that nerves. You were fantastic. So I'll keep on going down. Which World War II leader would I be and why? I kind of like to be someone that was considered by his men. I don't want to be. I want to be on the right. I want to be on the winning side, obviously. So I'm going to be an allied leader. If we're talking about leader or commander, I don't know. I mean, I think I'd like to be one of those leaders that was very well regarded by his men, but escaped all the kind of the bitchiness of historians 80 years later. Someone like Francis Tucker, commander of the 4th Indian Division, for example. No one banked. Well, Al Murray gave him a chapter in his command book. Someone like that, someone who just did his job and people respected him, but didn't get caught up in posthumously in what was he thinking then. I want to be under the radar. There we are. Probably. That's an interesting question. Hitler had over 40 attempts in his life, starting in 32. I believe if any had succeeded, how do you think World War II would have played out? Well, it's impossible to say, isn't it? I mean, of course, he was incredibly influential within the Third Reich, and without him, there isn't a Third Reich. But there's also lots of people who've got very used to the system, and I think someone else would have just come out. There was plenty more junior Hitlers, Heydrich, and all these other. I think it would have gone a different course, but I don't think it would have stopped World War II happening. It depends when it's all speculation. We can't. J.W. Johnson saying I'm correct. We're a prudent pre-plan idea. Yes, your insurance policy. There we are. So thanks. Someone's in agreement with me. So there we are. And as Great Yamin says, unloading by crane is more efficient than putting stuff on landing craft. Yeah, so there we are. That's the kind of Mulberry Harbour thing. I'm going to keep on strolling down. These questions are still from like ages ago. Yeah, there's lots of stuff about Hitler escaping and stuff. I mean, the whole Hunting Hitler TV show, was, you can't call it hunting various minor Nazis. Hunting Hitler, HH. It's alliterative. It sounds really cool. Yeah, and James Holland, who is a friend. James Holland got to travel the world when he made that TV show. Paid, so he did it, and he just said, "I will never go on record, on camera, saying that I believe that Hitler got out of Germany. As long as you don't put words in, I'll do it." So he went out there and looked at escape routes and looked at bunkers in Argentina and whatever he did. But he always said that but like any historian, that there's no truth in it. Hitler died in Berlin in a bunker. That's it. He died. Yeah. So there we go. Keep on going down. How about a show on Lord Haw, Tokyo Rose? It's an interesting idea, Scott, but I don't know what new can be said about them necessarily. I think there's a lot been said. I mean, again, if someone came through, that would be good. But I'm never. No subjects are well, the German occultism is definitely not on my list, but most subjects are on my list. If the right person comes along, if the right book comes out, yeah, sure. Anything else, it's not. Yeah, sure, that could be a good idea. How much did it's a good one. How much did the UK colonial countries contribute to the war effort prior to 1941? Well, there's contribute and there's contribute, isn't there? I mean, there's when I, as I often say, that Britain was not alone in 1940, and people say, yes, but the Indian Army didn't start fighting till, they weren't in the desert until this, that, and they're kind of right on that regard. But the very fact you've got an empire, even if they're not yet committed, is quite a good backup, isn't it? Right? So if ambulances aren't roaming the streets waiting, well, they kind of are, for accidents to happen. You call one when you have them, and you've got a fleet of ambulances out there, right? This is the analogy I'm going with. So when Churchill and the cabinet are making decisions in 1940 and pondering appeasement, pondering this and that and the other, they know that in their arsenal is an ambulance fleet of India and Pakistan, India and Australia, New Zealand, and Rhodesia, and South Africa, and Canada, and all these other, all the Jamaica and the West Indies, all these guys. They know that's there. They know that resource is there, and that the British Empire. Yes, there was lots of troubles about the British Empire in the 19th century and things, and there were things they had to overcome. And yes, we had to give countries back after World War II and all that kind of stuff. But the British Empire was mostly held together positivity in the 30s and the 40s. Yes, there's some endemic racism. Yes, there's independence parties, but there's a spirit. I'm not a royalist as such. I'm not an anti-royalist, but the Commonwealth, as it kind of stood, the British Empire was not it certainly wasn't the most evil empire in the world. Yes, there's things. Yes, it occupied Ireland illegally. I must get that one in there for my mate Colin. But these countries were going to come to the aid of the empire because they mostly believed in what the British were believing in, that Hitler and the Axis were forced, had to be stopped, and so on. So that there's an actual quantifiable contribution, but there's this philosophical this sense. So logistics wise, prior to 41, the colonial countries aren't contributing logistics wise, but they're contributing on a moral level, on a support level. It's nice to know you've got friends in places. So that's where I'm going to go with that. I'm more of a historian than David Irving is. My cats are more of a historian than David Irving is. David Irving started off on a good career and then became a rabid fucking Holocaust denying asshole. There we are. And if you don't know who he is, don't look him up. Don't give him any airspace. Yeah, keep on going down, looking for stuff. How about a stump the guest show? Yeah, there's lots of things you can stump me on. There's lots of stuff I don't know much about, and I kind of just wing my way through. Paul would be slim and won't go the headway. Yes, I would be known for my hat, wouldn't I? That's yeah, I guess so. But then I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Truscott is a good call to who I would be in a world leader. Simpson. Yeah, Simpson is a good call. Under the radar, did his job well, went home, boom. If you could have a sit down with 3 World War II characters, who would it be? That's a really good question, Gravel Bike Mark. And I'm really fortunate that I have sat down and had a beer with lots of amazing people who served in World War II. Major Howard, Jim Walworth, Don Malarkey, Wild Bill Garnier, Buck Compton, Hal Baumgart from Omaha Beach, Ken Tout, Northants Yeomanry, some of the guys on Juno Beach who served, Doug Hester, who served alongside Charlie Martin. I've sat down and had beers with many World War II characters, but kind of beyond the kind of the guys at the bottom, the privates and corporals, I guess further up. I mean, if I want to have an argument or have a friendly beer, I wouldn't want to go to the pub with Montgomery. I don't think we'd get on, but I think he's a very capable commander, but I don't like him as a person. If I wanted to go to the pub, I'd go to the pub with someone I can have a beer with. I'd get Horrocks, maybe, or go to the pub with him, probably. I don't know. Who would I have a sit down, have a beer with? Barnes Wallace, maybe would be interesting, wouldn't he? Yeah, I don't know. Lots of them. Admiral Ramsey. Well, we went to the same school, not at the same time. But Admiral Ramsey is an old Colcestrian like myself, which means that he went to the Colchester Royal Grammar School, the Purple Blazer. He only did 2 terms there or something. He wasn't from Colchester. He went there in whatever it was, 1920. But there was a painting of Ramsey in the library, or there was when I was there at the Colchester Royal Grammar School. Keep on going down. Phil now wants to talk about Nazi occultism. Well, if you want to do it, then maybe. But because you come at it from some academic approach and have something of value, but believe me, there's lots of stuff on YouTube, purporting to say that, Hitler had flying saucers, and that he was trying to get, vampires, and there's all sorts of fucking nonsense on there. Mark Felton and I will not be collaborating under any shape or form. That's it. I know that was a facetious, jokey comment, but that is a guarantee. I will not be working with him or Tick. I would love a World War II TV show on the French colonies during World War II. Yeah, that I would too. I would too. You know my problem finding just French guests from mainland France. Finding French guests from Algeria, Morocco, those kind of places would be, if not impossible, very hard. Morocco is kind of moving away from its French. Our taxi drivers in Morocco earlier this year saying that the English is now being taught in schools as a second language to Arabic, no longer French. So they're maybe not quite as keen on the French as they were years ago. And the same thing, Algeria. So I don't. That would be really fascinating. But yeah, I'll try and find. I'm a better historian than Ambrose was. I'll take that, although you're not setting the bar very high. Ambrose is in very few people's top third historians. Very popular and very mainstream and very important in the historiography. But I'll take that though. That's like, you know, yeah, I'll take that. But yeah, a low bar to reach, to be brutally honest. Nazi Xmas special, Nazi occultism and other wild stuff. We could do that. Yeah, could do that. Yeah, or maybe not. I don't know. See, this is Colin's bantering me now. I went to a grammar school because I passed 11 plus. It was free. Yeah, there was no pay. I didn't have to, my parents couldn't afford to pay. He knows the story, but when this sob story now, right? Okay, so when I passed 11 plus in 1980, and I got the option of going to grammar school, which my parents really pushed me to do. I didn't know that I really wanted to. I wanted to go to the comprehensive with my friends, but I went to grammar school, and my mum and dad, who were not doing terribly well financially, got this massive, great list of all the gear I had to have to attend the school. So first rugby kit, second rugby kit, so purple for the first, white for away games, and tennis rackets and cricket bats and cricket pads and cricket whites, plus all the school books, plus all this, that, and the other, plus all the, and they worked their way down the list. It was all in like lists of priorities. You need this stuff, you should get this stuff, and if you can afford it, get this. And a lot of people at my school were very rich and they just bought everything. And then when I was at school, when it got to the summer and cricket was being taught, you only got to be taught cricket if you had your own gear. So in my year of 90, there were maybe 5 or 6 boys, I was one of them, who didn't have cricket gear. Some of the others didn't have all the cricket gear, but they at least had the whites. Maybe didn't have the pads. I didn't have anything. So true story. We were just left to do other stuff. We would pick up litter, that kind of stuff, because we didn't have the gear. So let's get out your tiny violins now. So I never got taught how to play cricket. So I grew up, as you can understand, Colin, with a bit of a hatred for cricket because I wasn't allowed to play it. So there you are. You know this story, Colin, because we talked about this in the past. But that's why I don't like cricket, because I wasn't allowed to play because I wasn't rich enough. There we are. Depends where you grew up and what you put. But cricket for me, nah, yeah. So there you are. That's my bitterness about my childhood and the people in my school. I look back on my grammar school years as interesting, but I wish I'd gone somewhere else. Robert says, I would love to see Woody drinking sink packs. No, I see what we did there. With John Parshall, Craig Simon, Seth Parrott, and others. Yeah, I would be out of my depth. Pun, submarine pun there. I'll be out of my depth talking with those guys because, I'd be like watching, I'd be like turning up with my Bontempi organ in amongst Paul McCartney, Keith Richards, and, I don't know who else, Chris Christopherson, and being, yeah. But yeah, I would love to. I've had a beer with Craig Simons. I've not met John Parshall in person yet, or Seth. John, I hope our paths cross physically at some point. So there we are. There's that question that goes on social media: is what movie would you like to see remade with the Muppets, but with one serious actor? And I kind of would like to see a Muppets World War II show, but with one actor. I don't know, Herman Wouk's Winds of War with Animal as Hitler. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, could you do Pearl Harbor? Could you do Bridge Too Far with all the characters as Muppets, but Browning as a real actor? I don't know. Would that work? I don't know. It's got me thinking about stuff now. Good evening, Martia. And Martia's Rose the Reviewer podcast. We're not following that, listening to it. Martia does that with her friend. Great stuff. They talk about war films and stuff like that. A few more questions. Who was the most eccentric character in World War II? Ord Wingett, Digby Tatum Walter, Mad Jack Churchill, or someone else? Well, it's all about definitions of eccentric, isn't there? There's kind of it's like when people say, oh, my mate Dave, he's a bit of a character. That can mean he's really fun to be with, or he's a knob, can't it? It can mean either of that. You never quite know until you meet Dave. So, but being a bit of a character can mean anything, can't it? So, I mean, Wingett was, really, really eccentric. Just read about him if you don't know who he did. Even he commanded the Chindits. He was a Zionist. That's not the weird bit particularly, but he was weird eating habits, and just look him up. He was Digby Tatum Walter. I think is just that classic, slightly eccentric British upper class. The kind of character Ian Carmichael played in those kind of 1950s comedies of Peter said, like in I'm All Right, Jack. That kind of eccentric kind of, Mad Jack Churchill was quite possibly, in that kind of psychopath area. And I don't necessarily mean that negatively, that, they reckon that like 1 in 10 of us kind of have, psychopathic thing, that kind of desire for violence. And Ron Spears possibly had that kind of thing where you are tuned to being aggressive and violent to get the job done. Eccentric is a very very wide, all-encompassing term, isn't it? So my mate's a character. That can mean anything, can't it? Stonewall Jackson. Yeah, exactly, Gwilym. Wingett was Stonewall Jackson. With those two, between them, are really weird. Hitler was really weird. Stalin was really weird. And yet all of these people, they all have in some ways some kind of little bit of normality. This is why when we get into the kind of idea, Hitler obviously was a terrible, terrible person. But he loved his dogs, didn't he? And I always find that ability to we like our serial killers to be absolute fucking weirdos, so that we can't relate to them at all. If it turns out that some of them, sometimes they're kind of a bit like the ordinary guy down the street, that really spooks us, doesn't it? We need these weird, violent, horrific people to be outcasts, so we can say, yeah, they're not like, but actually, worryingly, a lot of them have little signs of being a bit like us, or rather, maybe we have signs of being a little bit like them. We all get angry. We all have weird things. Was there ever any reconciliation of the British intelligence individual that presented the photographic evidence? Well, see, he was never. Some people think he was kind of booted out. The guy was having medical. So we're talking about Brian Urquhart. So Brian Urquhart had been in a parachute accident in 1942. So he was part of the parachute regiment. He was captain, I think, or major at the time of Arnhem. And he'd had all sorts of health risks because he had crippling back pain because of whatever he'd done to his back, and probably suffering PTSD from earlier operations and stuff like that. And he was one of the people who kind of saw these photos. Now, one thing, if I remember correctly, is that the actual couple of photos that Browning was showed quite possibly were genuinely of Luftwaffe support vehicles as opposed to tanks of 9th or 10th SS. I forget who put that out there fairly recently. But even if they were the 9th and 10th SS, and Browning said, well, we're going to go anyway. Well, Brian Urquhart was just he was given a rest. He was mentally unwell. The guy had an amazing career. Look at him up. Look what he did with the United Nations. So it's not that he was ever in trouble for anything. He wasn't, booted out and charged with any, he was medically given a break. And I think Brian Urquhart's story has been a bit twisted by the movie. Seamus, could the British have taken North Africa before Rommel arrived, had Churchill not diverted forces away to Greece? Well, that's part of it. I think yes is the answer. Probably with hindsight, lots of these campaigns could have been avoided by, a different shuffling of resources. And yeah, probably. Well, before the Germans get there, when it was just Italians, a bit of management here, move some things there. But then the Germans could have got things better as well. That whole looking back is, it's always, you have the benefit of hindsight, don't you? I would love to give some quick comments on the Maisie battery, and then I will stop because it's been an hour and a half. I'm gonna have a sip of water. I thought it'd been about 45 minutes. No wonder some of you are bugging off to do other things. So Maisie battery, for those who don't know what it is a German position just to the west of Pointe du Hoc in Normandy that was supposedly uncovered a few years ago by a British historian stroke museum publisher guy. And it is now open to the public. So Maisie battery is not unimportant. It is another German position that is worthy of our interest. It had some interesting weapons there. It had some stuff there. But the owner of it, who I know, Gary Stern, is I think his heart's in the right place. He went for a particular way of kind of promoting it when it came out, which was to kind of make it out to be really this kind of uncovered, never been seen before. So he made these claims that I think are questionable. So it was uncovered since World War II. Well, no, he uncovered some of it, but some of it had been uncovered already. And it had been in books before. He kind of claimed he was the first one to discover it. And it had been in Atlantic War books going back in the 1980s. And claims about, Nazi gold there and stuff like that. So basically, I wish he'd never done that. I wish he'd just said, here's a German battery system, here's a set of German bunkers, come and have a look at it, and here's what it is. But people then kind of got behind this idea that the gunfire from Maisie battery killed all the guys in Omaha Beach and kind of silly things like this. And it's died down a bit now, but I wonder whether he wishes he'd done it in a more conventional way and just said, here's my gun battery, come and have a look at it. But these claims are odd. He's written a couple of books about it, and I'm not fans of them. I think there's some truth to what he says and there's some exaggeration, and that's kind of where I am now. I think it's it's an interesting site, but it's not as interesting as the Maisie battery people say it is. It's on a level of interesting, but not more interesting. Right. I think I might kind of leave it there, really, because it's been an hour and a half hours, 1.5 hours. But yeah, maybe one more. No, there's no more questions. Let's leave it at that. So I'm going to end by saying, oh, thank you. Well done for joining, Blaze. Despite having to block a few people, I'm really genuinely humbled by how lovely 99.9% of you are, because you police the sidebar. When people join, you make them feel very welcome. David and other people are buying people YouTube channel membership for a month, that kind of thing. And you have created the friendliness of the community, which is why I keep, if you like, enforcing the friendliness of the community. Someone today, I said, they responded saying, I unsub from channels who block users. Well, that's interesting, because all channels that have comments open block users, because you get people spamming with pornography, you get people neo-Nazis spamming. That's just a day-to-day thing. Manage a YouTube channel, you just get spam. You just get people trying to put the one that I get a lot in the last 2 or 3 weeks is just random lists of 6 names. It'll say something like, I'm using your names in the sidebar, Tamsin, James, Roderick, Jeff thing, and it's just people. It's spam sites. Names get through. You can't. I have words like sexual words in my list of banned words. You can't come on and say, see a picture of my dick. Well, you can say dick because dick is name. See a picture of my. I'm trying to think of a rude word for dick now. That I have those words banned, so you can't get away with a comment that includes pornographic terms and sexual terms like that, right? but names get through. So if you're trying to build credibility for a website and you have a bot that sends out these spams of 6, and then names get through, because you can't ban people called John or ban all people called, Ralph or something. So these are spam, basically. So I have to block them, because otherwise they just fill up, and it's yeah. So every channel blocks users. What I guess this guy didn't like is the fact that I was blocking people for freedom of speech. But there's freedom of speech and there's freedom of speech, right? And if you start coming on here and having a go at people, that's you're using your right to freedom of the speech. If you're coming on there and saying how great the Nazis are, boom, you're out. You've lost your right to freedom of speech on my channel. Now, if you want to write a book about how great Hitler was, and if you want to publish it, by all means, go ahead, you bloody moron. But that's it. So I have to block people. Oh, and this is a good point. So Gary August has just started on Facebook today or yesterday a group called Friends of World War II TV. So if you're a Facebook user, check out the Friends of World War II TV group and join it. I joined it today. It started, and then I found out it was there. So I wasn't. It started without me, which is really, really kind of cool. So there's a Facebook group for people like that. Good evening, JD. And as JD said, the vast majority of viewers are positive. The 0.1% tend to stand out mostly because of how ridiculous and hilarious they are. Yeah, but you do have to maintain your garden, and that means blocking people who are horrible and rude. So I do block people who are horrible and rude, but most of you I know are really fantastic. So there we are. You're weird, but that, as we said, that's good. You're eccentric weird. You're not General Wingate weird. You're not Stonewall Jackson weird, which is really weird. So there we are. I'll leave it at that. There's no more questions. I think I've pretty much answered all your questions now. Yeah. So there we are. And I've enjoyed the rest of my evening. I'm going to have a beer. So I'm not doing anything tomorrow night, because I'm not, unless I decide at the last minute to do something or something happens, but I don't think so. Then Wednesday night, coming this week, we've got the Pappy Boyington show. We've got Seth talking about the Pacific and Peleliu, and is that it? Is there another one? I can't remember now. I can't remember what's coming up. Bloody hell, I should know these things, shouldn't I? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we've got those two shows coming up, Seth and Bruce. That's it. Unless I hear back from another guest, but I think that's it. Then I'm off doing my Normandy tour. Then we come back with Arkan. So in fact, actually, after this week, the next guest is Phil Blood. After the week, there we are. I'm going now. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. This is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV. Keep watching. Consider becoming a patron, consider becoming a channel member, buy my guest books, check out all the other websites of other people, check out the other great YouTube channels like OTD, Military History, History Underground, History Explorer, Rosie the Reviewer, podcast, all the other ones we talk about. We Have Ways, Walking the Ground, all that stuff there. I'll see you all next time. Cheers, everybody. Bye.